The stone walls of Wexford Manor's chapel classroom held their breath as the rain tapped a slow, solemn rhythm against the leaded windows. Inside, 12 girls sat in perfect stillness, their midnight blue woolen gowns coarse, humble, unadorned, pooling like ink around their ankles. Each collar was starched white, each braid pinned with a single bone pin, each gaze fixed on the woman at the front. Sister Agatha, 58 winters old and as unyielding as the cathedral spire beyond the garden wall, stood with her hands folded over a leather-bound Latin primer. Her gray habit, frayed at the hem but immaculate in its dignity, smelled of beeswax and lavender. She had taught the daughters of minor nobility for 40 years, not to make them learned, but to make them meek. At the back row, seated with her spine curved like a bowstring, sat Anne of Wexford, 20 years old, the last child of a knight who had died in the mud of Calais, leaving behind only a title, a debt, and a crimson velvet gown. It had been her mother's wedding dress. Now it was Anne's rebellion. The fabric shimmered even in the dim candlelight, deep as spilled wine, rich as a king's ransom. No girl in Wexford had worn such a color since the last duchess.
Past.
It was not merely fashion, it was defiance wrapped in silk. And wore it like a crown. When Sister Agatha called upon her to recite the Pater Noster, the prayer of humble surrender, and did not rise. She did not even turn her head. And, the sister said, voice low but carrying like a bell in a crypt, the prayer, and exhaled, slow and deliberate. Then she laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that shattered the quiet. "Why should I speak dead words?" she asked, her voice ringing too loud in the hushed chamber. "My father's bones are rotting in a foreign land because men like you prayed for peace while swords still sang. What good is Latin when it cannot feed a hungry child?" The girls flinched. One dropped her inkwell. The black stain spread like a sin across the wooden floor. Sister Agatha did not raise her voice. She did not strike the desk. She did not even blink. Instead, she stepped down from the dais, her sandals whispering against the cold stone. She walked to Anne's bench, knelt beside her, eye to eye, and said, so softly only Anne could hear, "You are the color of queens, child. But you carry yourself like a beggar who has forgotten she was ever given anything at all." Anne rose. She did not apologize.
She did not bow.
She swept her crimson gown around her like a banner of war and walked out, the first girl in 4 decades to leave a lesson unbidden. The door clicked shut behind her. The silence that followed was heavier than any sermon. The courtyard was cold. The oak tree, ancient and gnarled, shed its last leaves in a slow, mournful dance. A single wooden bench, draped in black cloth, stood beneath its boughs. Around it, the household had gathered, the cook with her apron still dusted in flour, the stable boy with his hands still smelling of hay, the lady of the manor in her fur-lined mantle. Even the old chapel keeper, bent with age, leaning on his cane. No one spoke. Sister Agatha emerged from the manor, carrying a book bound in cracked leather, its cover embossed with a single silver thorn, the Book of Humility. It contained the confessions of noble women who had fallen from grace, a duchess who stole communion wine, a countess who poisoned her husband's rival, a girl who burned her own wedding veil to spite her mother. And was brought out, still in her crimson gown, her face pale but proud. "Kneel," Sister Agatha said, and did not move. "Kneel," the sister repeated, and this time there was no warmth in the word. Anne knelt. The book was placed in her lap, heavy, ancient, smelling of dust and tears. The sister then removed her rosary and laid it gently atop the cover. "You have chosen to wear crimson," she said, her voice echoing in the stillness. "So you shall wear it until you understand why it was forbidden. 3 hours. No food. No water. No speaking."
No rising.
The girls watched from the gallery above, their blue gowns glowing like distant stars in the gathering dusk. The servants stood silent. The wind carried the scent of wood smoke and wet earth. Anne's fingers curled around the book. The velvet of her gown, once a symbol of her power, now clung to her skin like a second skin of shame. The cold seeped through the fabric, into her bones, into her chest. Her pride, so loud in the classroom, began to tremble. She thought of her father, how he had pressed the gown into her hands on his deathbed, whispering, Asterisk, let them see you're not like them, and let them know you were born to stand tall. Asterisk, but here, in the silence, she realized, he had not meant for her to stand alone. He had meant for her to stand with something greater than herself. By the third hour, her knees ached, her throat burned, her vision blurred, and when a single tear fell onto the page, blurring the confession of a girl who had once called her mother a witch, Anne did not wipe it away. She let it stain the ink, and for the first time in her life, she wept in silence. Night had fallen when Sister Agatha returned. The chapel was empty save for 2 candles. Their light flickered over the stone floor, painting shadows like whispered prayers. Anne still knelt. The crimson gown was torn at the hem, a jagged tear from the rough stone. Her hair, once braided with precision, hung loose and dull. Sister Agatha entered with the paddle. It was not thick, not cruel, not carved for pain. It was thin, supple, made of seasoned oak and wrapped in oiled leather. On its face, etched with a fine needle, was the sigil of the Order of the Quiet Hand, a single tear encircled by a thread. She stood behind Anne. No words, only silence. Then, thud, the paddle struck, firm and true, over the velvet of Anne's back. 1, for the disrespect to knowledge, and did not cry out. She did not flinch. Only her breath hitched. Thud. 2, for the insult to those who gave you their time. A tremor ran through her shoulders. Her fingers dug into the book. Thud. 3, for the lie you told yourself. That beauty excuses arrogance. The third strike was the quietest and the most devastating. A single thread, a crimson strand, finer than a spider's silk, snapped from the hem of her gown and floated down, landing on the stone floor like a fallen star.
And did not speak.
But her hands, trembling now, reached down, not to stop the tears, but to touch the thread. And when she lifted it, she whispered, so softly the candles might have been the ones to hear. Asterisk, I didn't know. I was hurting more than you. Asterisk, Sister Agatha lowered the paddle. She knelt beside her. She did not embrace her. She did not comfort her. She simply said, Asterisk, now you know. Asterisk, a week passed.
And wore no crimson.
She wore the same dark blue gown as the others, plain, humble, unremarkable. She sat in the front row. She recited her prayers without hesitation. She cleaned the chapel floors before dawn. On the morning of the feast of St. Agnes, Sister Agatha opened the Book of Humility to find a single crimson thread tucked between the pages of a confession written by a girl who had murdered her lover in jealousy. Beneath it, in careful, trembling script, Anne's hand, was written, Asterisk, I wore pride like armor. I did not know it was a cage. Asterisk, that night, Anne came to the sister's chamber. I am sorry, she said, voice raw as a wound. Sister Agatha nodded. Say it again. I am sorry, and whispered, tears falling now, freely, without shame. I thought my gown made me special. But I forgot. I was only special because someone gave it to me. My father, he didn't want me to be feared. He wanted me to be loved. I just didn't know how to be loved without being loud. The sister reached into her chest and pulled out the crimson gown, folded, clean, untouched since the courtyard. I kept it, she said, not to punish you, but to remind you you were never meant to hide who you are, only to honor who you could become. A year later, Anne stood at the front of the chapel classroom. She was no longer a student. She was an assistant to Sister Agatha. She wore the same dark blue gown, but at the collar, where no one would notice unless they looked closely, a single crimson thread was woven into the seam. When a new girl, 16, proud, dressed in a too bright green ribbon, sneered during